Hi, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, which is a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. And our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. And with me today, I get so excited, I really do, about every guest because I learn from every guest. And if I read their book, which I usually try to do, I learn so much. And with me today is Tim Wendel. He is author and writer, award-winning author, I should say, of Rebel Falls. And it's a fascinating book about the Civil War. But Tim Wendel is writer in residence at Johns Hopkins University. He's the author of several books. He's written for many publications. And I highly recommend going on Tim's website, which will be in the notes, but it's Tim, T-I-M, Wendel, WENDEL.com. You didn't get to write it down, you'll see it in the blog. And I want to welcome Tim Wendel to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Tim.
Great to be with you, Betsy. It's fun. We're going to have some fun.
Yes, we are. I just love this book, and it taught me things, information that I wasn't aware of, that I wasn't taught in school, Tim. How did you come up with this knowledge, with this story? And I have to say this. I so admire writers. I really do, because the research you all put into a book, I don't look at writers and authors the same way anymore. I really appreciate you all. I wish I had your talent. I really do. So how did you find this story?
Well, Betsy, I'm a history buff. History was one of my favorite subjects way back in high school and in the college and such. And I grew up near the Canadian border. In fact, my wife's Canadian. But I had never heard of this network of Confederate or rebel spies along our border with then British Canada. Canada was part of Britain. That pretty much extended from maritime provinces, Halifax, all the way to Detroit. I'd never heard of this. And I stumbled across just a brief mention of two individuals in Doris Kearns Goodwin's team of rivals. And the two guys are named John Yates Bell, who was a Southerner from Virginia, and a guy named Bennett Burleigh, who actually was from Scotland. And they were real-life guys. And they were part of this vast network, which was well-funded in 1864. And what were they trying to do? Well, they were part of this network was trying to create any type of international incident along our northern border. It looks like the Civil War is slowly coming to an end. Lee is pretty much surrounded at Petersburg outside of Richmond. It seems like it's only a matter of time. But the rebels are desperate. They're desperate to kind of turn the tables. And what Bell and Burleigh had cooked up, their scheme was to seize the only remaining Union warship on the Great Lakes. At that point, it was on Lake Erie near Sandusky. And it had a lot of guns. It was 160 feet. It was iron-hulled. It was had both sail and steam, and it was the only one left. Why is it the only one left? Because everything else was concentrating along, the Atlantic Ocean side, trying to blockade the South. And there, Bell and Burleigh's scheme, part of this Confederate conspiracy, was to seize this vessel on the eve of the presidential election in 1864. Lincoln's running for re-election, and free some very elite Confederate prisoners that were being held in Ohio, and then bombard Toledo, Cleveland, Buffalo on the eve of the election. And I had never heard of this. And I went, this is
Me
nuts.
either.
And this could have turned the table, and in all likelihood, probably Lincoln is not reelected because people were, and justifiably so, very, very tired of the war by that point.
I was really amazed because I was thinking, I never heard of this in school. I never heard of Confederate spies. I never heard of these two ships. And I don't like to sound ignorant, but I didn't even know that it went all the way up to New York. I mean, I knew, of course, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, but until I read your book, I had no idea it went up that far, and even into, they were running into Canada. So thank you for educating me.
Well, I was educating myself at the early attic. I'm going, what? This happened really? So it was a lot of fun to, in a sense, tease out, and I think that's one of the real, fascinations that I have with history and doing research. And it's not like I do maybe at times a lot of research. I like writing maybe a little bit more. But I remember being over in, Betsy, in London, and my son at that point was working there. And I just, on a lark, went to the British Museum, kind of went to the library, big research library they have in conjunction with that. And as I mentioned, this guy, Bennett Burleigh, was from Scotland. And I just kind of waltzed in there and said, do you have anything on this guy, Bennett Burleigh? He was involved in the Civil War, even though he was, in a sense, Scottish and from the UK. And at that point in time, Burleigh, during the war, spelled his name, his last name, Burley. And that's the way I put in the research request. Nothing came out. I'm going, that's kind of interesting. I guess I've hit a dead end here. But the researcher, bless her heart, was much more, thinking outside the box than I was. He said, I've heard of this guy a little bit, but maybe the spelling on the name is different. And she decided to spell it Burleigh. And I went, okay, go for it. You're above my pay grade now. And and she came out with this thick file for Bennett Burleigh. He changed his name once he escaped our Civil War and got back to London. And I was amazed. He became one of the most famous war correspondents for the London Daily Telegraph for about 30 years. And so it's amazing at times, maybe it's the way we're taught about, conflict and people and history just overall. It's easy just to put everything in boxes. Oh, okay, if you're going to learn about the Civil War, well, you got to know Gettysburg, and you've got to know Vicksburg, and you've got to know, Sherman's march across the South. And we just match it up with dates, and we tend to match it up with men. Women were often forgotten in the Civil War. And it always just becomes like bric-a-brac. And I think once you get outside of those boundaries a bit, you start to realize, wow, there's amazing people. And, the war extended all the way up, at least in theory, and at least in a spy network, all the way up to our northern border with Canada. It's just, it's like you shake up the snow globe, so to speak, and go, wow, this is a lot more interesting and exciting than maybe I was taught in school.
Yes, definitely. I went to Gettysburg, as I had mentioned before. I started the interview, and that was back in 2006. And I thought that was very interesting, and how, you watch movies about the Civil War. I mean, just how they fought, like one right in back of the other. It's just, you're trying to picture it in this field, and it's just incredible. And then I lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee for 3 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Not very popular being a Yankee down there.
I feel your pain. I lived for a while in Knoxville, and I was like going, who's this guy?
Yeah, so, the battles fought down there, and I couldn't picture them climbing up Lookout Mountain, and how treacherous, that was, and it split families apart, and it just was, it was a long war. So your book, Rebel Falls, and folks, I highly recommend reading it, and I really don't want to give a lot of the book away because I really want you to read it. It's a fascinating book. I really had difficulty putting it down because I wanted to see what happens next. So your book, this book is a mixture of fiction and nonfiction. Is that correct?
That's correct, Betsy. But most of it, almost all the characters, Belle Burleigh, some of the other spies, William Seward, who was then Secretary of State. That's probably the second most powerful person in the North. They're all real-life folks. They're very much based on the research I did about their lives, and like I say, finding that file in London, I was able to find a great deal about John Yates Bell, kind of the head spy for the rebels along the Canadian border. And so that, the great thing about novels is you can make some things up, but I think people sense when the underpinnings or the real nugget is based in fact, and that's the case time and time again in Rebel Falls. If I was kind of stuck, I would go, well, let's do a little bit more research and see, exactly what maybe the rebel conspiracy was up to, see how the Union tried to respond to that. And kind of two themes came up. One was this overlooked potential, at least rebel, network along our northern border, an overlooked front, but also the kind of the unsung role of women on both sides during the Civil War, which surprised me. It shouldn't have, but it did. And one of the things, one of the main characters who is made up is a woman named Rory Chase, but she's a composite of several major women on both sides of the conflict in the Civil War, and one of them being a woman named Sarah Edmonds, who I had never heard of. Again, I kind of thought I knew history before I started this dumb project. But she was amazing, and she disguised herself as a man, joined an infantry unit out of Michigan, fought in the war for 3 years, then deserted, but we pretty much can put together that she left because she was suffering from PTSD, and then 20-some years later decided, my life would be a lot better if I had my military pension, which I earned. I fought for 3 years for the North. And she went to court and, in a sense, outed herself that she had played this role as a man and won her full pension back. And you have instances of those cases of those on both sides, on the North and the South. People are just so, unfortunately, impassioned by this struggle, by this war, that they would go to such lengths, even women disguising themselves as men so they can join the armies. And you're just going, this is wild. And so that was kind of the underpinning for really the only made-up character in Major One in Rebel Falls, which is Rory Chase. And but she's very much based, in fact, on individuals like Sarah Edmonds and others from both sides of the conflict.
That is so incredible, for a woman. I mean, I think myself, I don't think I would, in my younger day, would do that. But the character, Rory Chase, is very brave, very smart. And, of course, back then, men didn't think that women were, intelligent and, thought of them more as property. So she was, the character Rory Chase is just a woman of such brilliance and strength to me, a leader, and she, stood up for what she believed in. And I just think it's you did a wonderful job
and
portraying her. And I really felt that I was in the book, in that story. How long did it take you to research for this book?
Probably about 3, maybe 4 years, Betsy. It's funny because everybody works differently. I mean, I've got writer friends who arguably are much better researchers than me, but they'll do these deep dives. They'll go for like months to the Library of Congress, so they'll go to, find someplace, on the road et cetera. And I'll research certainly, and I enjoy it. But as I said earlier, I get excited about things and get antsy to write them down, and so I tend to alternate a little bit between research and writing. And so when I get really enthusiastic about something, in fact, they tease me at the family dinner table when maybe I've talked a little bit too much, like 4th, 5th night in a row about something I've stumbled across, like gosh, do you believe they used to have these Confederate spies along the northern border in the Civil War? And my family, bless their heart, they keep me on track. They kind of, especially my wife, she'll go, oh, that's interesting. Hey, it's time you started writing some of that instead of just telling us all about it. She's absolutely right. but conversely, if I'm writing and I go, oh, man, I need something more for this chapter or this scene, it's kind of flat, then that's telling me, okay, I got to stop here, man. I got to pause, and I've got to go find out some more details or some more insight with it. And I think part of it, too, when you're doing a novel, is what the character's motivations are is hugely important, because sometimes it's like reading the Ouija board, or trying to read the tea leaves. You're trying to figure out what they're about, and maybe that's a little bit easier when you're dealing with a real-life character like John Yates Bell or Bennett Burley and some of their cohort. But with Rory, it was more difficult because I'm kind of assembling her from other parts of research that I found, and this is where some good readers at times can really help you out. I had some great readers on Rebel Falls, and one of them, when I was kind of stuck, what's Rory Chase about? What is she really trying to do? And one of my readers said, she's trying to first learn the rules, know the rules, and especially in terms of the Civil War, and she's got to know the rules, and then she's got to decide which rules or how to break them. And I went, bingo, that's what she's about. And the learning curve is steep, and it's even going beyond for like a character like Rory Chase, because she's involved in this spy network. So, who is she going to betray? What rules are going to break? And when that person told me that, I had an epiphany. That was like, yeah, okay, that's what Rory's going to be about. And those are difficult things to do. It's difficult, obviously, enough to learn the rules, especially when you're, kind of almost flying by the seat of your pants, doing almost an improv, but then figuring out how you can be the most effective by breaking some of those rules. And that was fun at that point.
I'm amazed, Tim, at writers, and I always ask the guests who are writers about their writing process, because to me, when I read a book and I'm thinking, okay, how did this writer come up with the dialogue? That just really, I might sound a little cuckoo, that really fascinates me. The details of the characters, right? The background, the scenery, and the dialogue. Like, how did you come up with the dialogue between the characters? Because we take so much for granted when we pick up a book, but so much work goes into it. That's what I've been telling the audience a lot lately. Really a lot of work. And so doing this show, I've really come to really appreciate writers, because I never knew before the research and the time. Like, some people take 5-8 years or more to write a book. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. So how do you come up with your dialogue with your characters?
I almost kind of act it out. And my, thankfully I've got a room where I can do my work. Nobody thinks I'm too crazy, even though I have been known to kind of be talking out loud at Starbucks, or I'm writing there or something. But I think, you're just trying to, what's that old saying? Quality writing is, in a sense, what I'm seeing in my head, and I write that well enough so you start to see it or dream along with me. And now we're starting to share the same dream. And that's, I think, when writing really can be not only fun, but it can just soar to a different level. And I think that's when, you're reading a book or whatever, and suddenly, maybe, you read at night, maybe like I do, and suddenly you look up and go, oh my gosh, it's 1-2 o'clock in the morning. I've been reading for 2 months. Time kind of stops. And the other thing, so I'll try to act it out. I'll really be asking, like I was saying just a little bit earlier in the case of Rory with Rebel Falls, what do you really want? what are you trying to do? It's a mystery to me. You've got to tell me. You've got to show me. And so I'll often be asking my characters, especially the major ones, what's your motivation? What are you really trying to do? And I think to really tease that out, especially when you're working on a new book, a project, you almost have to, at least as a friend of mine told me one time, visit it every day. Now, we're all busy, you know. I mean, I wrote my first novel, Castro's Curveball, when I had a high-powered day job at USA Today. And my kids were much younger. The only time I had was on the subway, on the metro, DC Metro, going to work. That's where I wrote that book. And but I think if you come with it with some regularity, like I usually write in the morning. I usually write almost first thing. I kind of wolf down my bowl of Cheerios, and then I kind of go, okay, what do we got going on here? And I think if you do that, the mind gets kind of used to it. Oh, this is the time of day we do this. And kind of can come with some amazing, you know, insights and such that you didn't know at all. And then Stephen Hunter, who's a really good thriller writer, I like some of his stuff. He used to be the movie critic at the Washington Post. And he's the one who talked about how you had to visit your project almost every day. You know, I tend to take Sundays off, but almost every day. And visit can be just 5-10 minutes. But if you don't visit it, he was of the mind, and I agree, that if you skip too many days, if you're always waiting for inspiration, when you come back to the project, that's kind of tough to get it going again. It's almost like if you haven't called your mother in 2 or 3 weeks. You know, when you make that call after that long a time, what's your mother's first reaction going to be? She's going to be a little miffed. Well, where you been? How come you haven't called me? Your characters are kind of the same way, at least to me. If I don't check in with them, they get a little upset, and I know they'll eventually warm up to me again. But you know, why go through that? Why not just keep in touch with them and check in with them and say, you know, hey, Rory Chase, why you feel so driven to join the Union effort to stop the rebel spies in 1864, et cetera. And some of the answers, if you stop and listen, will be pretty amazing.
You know what? I think one of the personality, not so much personality, but I think what drove, one of the many reasons I think that drove Rory to do what she did was a sense of throwing herself into something because she was grieving over the loss of so many people she knew. And I could see that, especially from someone who, I mean, I know threw myself into my work too. And she just wanted a purpose. And I think she just wanted to do something to honor her loved ones, friends that she knew, and to find her purpose in life at that time. I sensed that a lot.
I should have talked with you a couple of years ago. You could help me out a lot.
You could call me on your next book.
That's right. That really stuck. What's going on here? But it's funny because you're absolutely right. And one of the things is that started to take off in that direction with Rebel Falls. I had to remind myself of something Anne Lamont says. She once, told us at a writer's workshop out in California, but it sounds a little strange at first, but she's of the mind you have to let bad things happen to good people. And what happens, say, with somebody like a Rory Chase, some of the other characters in Rebel Falls, I start really rooting them on. I'm not quite sure how they're going to figure things out. We got to figure that out in the course of the book. But one of the mistakes I made earlier in my career is I would really, become infatuated with them. I'd start to protect, the main characters. And if you do that too much, then the story starts going downhill real quick. I mean, the characters may be safe and sound, but your novel or your book is unwinding really fast. And so that's tough to do. Not so much in Rebel Falls, but some of the other novels I've done. I remember one I I had to kill off one of the main characters, and my family was going, "What's wrong with you?" And I was in mourning. That was the only way I could do it plot-wise. But so that had to happen, and again, that's an ultimate bad thing. But it made the story better. But sometimes you got to suffer for a little bit to make sure your story comes out.
Yeah, and I just felt for Rory because I understood her, and without giving too much away, because I want people to read this book, I can say from my own personal experience, profound loss will have you do things you never thought you would do. You would never, you never think of doing. Oh, I'm sure she probably never thought, I'd dress as a man and, go into the army or go be a spy. But I think her grief drove her to that. And she just maybe she didn't think of the consequences. She knew it was dangerous, but she was like, hey, maybe this is a way I could honor them. And they could live through me, and I will honor them by serving for a cause that she believed in. And I
think you're absolutely right.
That's one of the things that I got from that, from your book, from her character.
Oh.
And the Underground Railroad, of course, I'm sure everyone has heard of it. And it's funny, too, because when reading your book, there was articles in the paper about what they thought was places in Underground Railroad in Ohio. I didn't save the article of where slaves would hide until they could get to the railroad. And I thought of your book. I was reading your book at the time. And that played a big role in your book.
Yeah, and it's that's a role that I didn't expect. I was, I grew up in upstate New York, so I knew a little bit about the Underground Railroad, but I went in, and if anybody's ever up in Niagara Falls, I urge you to do this. Besides looking at the falls, it's a small museum, but it's called the Underground Railroad Heritage Center, and it's top notch. And I knew nothing about it. I was up in Niagara Falls visiting some family, and mostly I was going, okay, I'm going to set a good chunk of Rebel Falls in Niagara Falls. So let's go look around. And mostly I was looking at, the way the falls is, both sides of the border, what would have been the major bridge at that point, ways to get across. And I wandered into this heritage center, and I went, whoa, this is amazing. And I found out about a place called the Cataract House Hotel, which is no longer around. It burned in 1945, burned down. But back in the 1860s, 50s, it was one of the most luxurious hotels in the world, pretty much. I mean, everybody stayed there. It was the place to go. And one of the things that I found out at this museum, at the Heritage Center, that I'm going, I've got to work this in. This is just so good, is the Cataract House stood pretty much right near the American Falls. If you go to the American Falls today, the precipice there before you go across the bridge to Goat Island, that's pretty much right where it was. And their wait staff was almost all, especially in the dining room, African-American men, either freedmen or freedom seekers, escaped slaves themselves. And I wish we had film back in the day, because reading the documentation of how they simply served dinner there just sounds amazing. Everything was done like in regiment style, and here comes now the entree, followed by here comes the dessert, wagon, cart, etc. But besides putting on a good show and serving great food and all this, the Cataract House staff had a much more dangerous, intense role, because certainly in the years leading up to 1861 and the start of the Civil War, you had people coming from all around the world, including the South. And they would come up and they would have a couple slaves/servants with them. And the wait staff would always be checking out, okay, who's just checked in? Who do they have? Whatever. And they would come up to, say, the slave who's taking care of the young children for the plantation family, or the one who's driving the buggy for the, planter family is vacationing at the Cataract House and seeing the Niagara Falls. And they would just kind of, in the shadows, just almost in whispers, say, do you want your freedom? Do you want to escape? Because literally right across the Niagara River, there's Canada. There's freedom. They cannot be returned from Canada back to the south like they could in the 1850s, north of the Mason-Dixon line. And so that would be the question. And it can only be answered one of two ways, yes or no. And it was right now, if it was a yes. And they always had a rowboat down this flight of stairs that I found a picture of and then found on a map, 290 steps down to this landing where a rowboat was always waiting 24/7 with an accomplished oarsman ready to row them to safety across the rapids of Niagara River to Canada. And once I heard that, they were going, "Oh, we got to use this. This is awesome." And it allowed kind of that past of Niagara Falls. And I think today Niagara Falls is kind of viewed as, it's not on par with Disney World, and it's kind of ticky-tack and all this. But there's the past in Niagara Falls, and it's not just the beauty. It's the danger and the intrigue and the escape, that happened in those years just before the war broke out. And then with Rebel Falls, it was easy enough just to use incorporate some of those same characters I'd researched and say, I bet you they would help, in a sense, confront or combat the Confederate spies too. And it all kind of fell into line. But it only happens, I happen to wander in this museum and just go, wow, what is it? And again, I grew up 15 miles from Niagara Falls as a kid. I'd never heard of this. And again, I was just going, this is fun. We got to incorporate it.
Yes, I felt that Niagara Falls was a character in the book, and my heart was in my throat when they were in the boat or walking, on the bridge or running for their lives on the bridge. And I was just like, oh, I wonder if they're going to flip over. But it was very, very, very dangerous. And I've never been to Niagara Falls myself, but I never heard of that history associated with Niagara Falls. Never knew that. And I only, this might sound a little nuts, I didn't even know that they recruited Irish, the Irish that came over to the Civil War. And I didn't even know that until I saw a movie, I think it was The Gangs of New York, where I saw that. I never heard of that before. We're not taught outside the box of history, Tim, especially when I was growing up. I went to school grammar school in the 60s. We weren't taught all this. We're just, dates, right? You're taught the dates. Of course, you're taught about, Abraham Lincoln and John Wilkes Booth, but that was also fascinating, how John Wilkes Booth was in the book, and, just the whole story is just fascinating. And folks, I don't want to give away the plot. I want you to buy this book. I really do. What would you like the readers to take away from your book?
Let's say I think what I hope they take away is not to be frightened of the history. What I tried very much to do was have a page turner, something that obviously is based in history but goes beyond. And kind of to echo what you were just saying there a little bit, history, I think, we're taught dates, generals, presidents. What I hope people find in Rebel Falls is the people, because the people can be as colorful and as dashing and as contradictory and even as villainous as you find in any good story or any movie. And that's and it's, I'm heartened too that you even brought up the setting of Niagara Falls, because that's one of the things I was trying to do with Rebel Falls was Niagara Falls is one of my favorite places in the world, but it has this undercurrent of you're not sure what's going to happen next. It's got this undercurrent of danger and such, and I think you can even find that today despite the way it's all been built up and such. And so that's what I hope people get. I hope they're entertained, and I think they will be, and maybe find a little bit more about our history in Rebel Falls.
Oh, I know they will definitely be entertained. I will have to say this, folks. This is the first Tim Wendel book I have ever read. I'm so glad I received a copy. And next time you write a book, I definitely would want to read it and have you on my show, because I just think it's an excellent book. And I would love to see this made into a movie, Tim. I don't know how you go about that. But
pray every night, light a candle.
That would make a fascinating movie.
And I'm hoping there's some Hollywood actress out there who would love to play this character of Rory Chase, because I think she's so much fun.
Yes. I just loved Rory Chase's character. A woman, really, I feel, a full strength, a true warrior, WARRIOR. I mean, that sounds like I'm saying it correctly. I'm from New Jersey. But so really, I had such admiration for the character Rory Chase, and I was thinking through this book. I don't know how a book becomes a movie, but really, I would love to see this being made into a movie. I think it's fascinating, and job. I'm not a book critic by any means, but job well done, Tim Wendel. And I just love talking to you, and how you started like sports writing and going into history. That's a switch. Do you still do sports? That's like back when. That's a big change.
I still like doing sports for sure, but it's funny because folks will say, "Yeah, that's a change of direction," and it is. But it's still, I love the people. If the people enthrall me, then I almost feel like I've got to tell you, meaning the reader, about it. And I had a good friend of mine, because I do switch around a bit. I even did a book about cancer docs one time and such. And sometimes I just go, hey, what am I doing? And thankfully I've got good friends. And one of them, when I was really kind of beginning Rebel Falls and going, ooh, I don't know, this is a little bit different than I've done before. And I was kind of whining to one of my friends. My friend said, no, I'm just doing it again. I'm going, what am I doing again? And he said, all your books, whether they're sports or, medical memoir, or, novels, he said almost all of them, you have individuals who are underdogs trying to overcome great odds. And I went, oh, yeah, okay, I can do that. So sometimes it's good to have people in your corner remind you of what you're good at.
Yes, that's true. It is. It's nice for someone to take you under their wing and saying, we see something in you, we see something in your book, your characters, your writing, and I think your students are very blessed to have you as a teacher. I mean, to have Tim Wendel as a teacher for creative writing, I mean, that's a wonderful opportunity, and I'm sure you're great. You're a great educator. I just want to thank you. You're welcome, Tim Wendel, for coming on Chatting with Betsy, writing your book. And where can people purchase your book?
It's pretty much available anywhere, certainly online and such. But, I'd like to ask a favor, people that are interested in it. If there's an independent bookstore in your area, go down there and see if they have it. If they don't have it, even order it through there. We've been lucky, blessed, whatever, in the last couple of years where independent bookstores have had a resurgence. And I just came back from oh man, several weeks on the road promoting Rebel Falls, and pretty much everything was at an independent bookstore. And it just was so good to see those people, doing well. They're the ones who know, the books and such. So if you have that opportunity, if you're lucky enough to have an independent bookstore near you or in your town, check it out.
Well, thank you so much, Tim Wendel. Great job. And I would not be surprised if this becomes a bestseller. It is a wonderful book to read. It touched me and brought back wonderful memories for me. And I was even thinking of the movie Shenandoah. I don't know if you ever watched that movie.
Yeah.
Yes. Reminded me of that. Seeing, different areas down south, and just a job well done. And I want to encourage readers, please get the book, Rebel Falls. You will not, a novel, you will not be disappointed. I really enjoyed reading it. As a matter of fact, when I received the press for it, I was like, oh, I want this book. I hope I get a copy of this book. I want to read it because I've never read, a novel like yours. I read like a Harlequin romance that takes place in the Civil War many, many years ago, but not a novel such as yours, which is, I think, excellent. So I want to encourage readers, your reader, listener, please check out the book, Rebel Falls, by Tim Wendel. That's Wendel. And the website, timwendel.com, I said, right? Yes, timwendel.com. And it will be in the blog that Jeannie White, his station manager, writes, and Jeannie produces the show. So thank Jeannie, and I want to thank you listeners for listening. Please subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. It's for free. Tell your friends. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Spreaker, iHeart, Amazon Music, to name a few. And I'm here to help people, educate people, and for resources. So please tell your friends, and they will get something from my show, because I know I do. If I have to toot my own horn, I will. And that's what I have to say today, folks. That's the show. If you want to follow me, Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel, on Facebook. And if you were looking for a support group, if you're a caregiver, #Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement on Facebook. And as I always say at the end of my show, folks, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind, shine your light bright, because we need it now more than ever, don't we? This is Betsy Wurzel. You're a host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Thanks again for listening. Bye-bye now.